Welcome to this Frequency Matters podcast. I'm Pat Hindle, and I'm here with my co-host Eric Higham. Today, we're talking with Peter Linder, Head of Thought Leadership for North America at Ericsson. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So, Ericsson recently released their November 2024 mobility report, which we always look forward to these reports because there's a lot of data in them. So I thought we'd explore some of the insights from that. What are some of the overall findings for the Ericsson November 2024 mobility report for growth of 5G through 2030?
So it's a very good question. So what we've done in this every year in November, that's when we extend the forecast normally by a year from previous years. So this year is the first time it extends into 2030. So what I think are some of the main highlights there that we project that 5G will carry 80% of all mobile data traffic globally by 2030. So that is like typically 10 years into the deployment cycle. And it takes another 6 or 7, sometimes 8 years before we actually meet the maximum penetration. But it's still carrying a significant amount of traffic already at 2030. We're projecting 6.3 billion 5G subscriptions by 2030, and 2/3 of them being mobile subscriptions. So mobile phone subscriptions have dominated in the beginning. So we'll see that some of the other categories of devices will come into play and representing 1/3 when we're at the back end of the decade. There's also, I think, a little bit how the penetration differences are between different regions. We expect North America, Western Europe, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries to hit over 90% by 2030. And during this period, we also see that mobile data traffic on average will grow at 90% CAGR. So there'll be a growth on the mobile data traffic throughout the period.
So, Peter, if we dig a little bit into the details, what does the report say about 5G midband and 5G standalone? And what does that mean for future growth?
So I think a little bit what it means for future growth. You could say that we did some shortcuts when we introduced 5G with non-standalone architecture, and we had very different spectrum strategies in different countries. So in some countries, midband was the only thing available from the beginning. In some other countries, low band and high band played a more important role in the launch phases, like here in the US, for example, and then midband came in down the road. What we can say from where we are and going forward, on the 5G SA side or the standalone, there's 1.2 billion 5G standalone subscriptions today, but 1.1 billion of them are in China and India. So you see a difference. You can see a difference between different markets regarding how their adoption of the standalone strategy look like. So we expect that to grow from 1.2 billion today to 3.6 billion in 2030. And that meaning that the 5G subscription, even at 2030, are 60% of the total. So we will have a scenario during the rest of the decade here with a mix of NSA and SA networks. If we look at the midband, there's 30% of all sites outside of China that are upgraded to 5G midband today. So China's well ahead on the midband upgrades, but 30% of sites, mobile sites outside China, are upgraded to 5G. And also, if we look at the population coverage as another important measure, outside of mainland China is expected to reach 40% this year. So population coverage is typically higher than site coverage, but coverage varies significantly between the different regions.
And so fixed wireless access has been a hot topic lately, and it seems poised for significant growth. So what does the report say about fixed wireless access?
Yeah, so fixed wireless access, I think, has been a success for 5G. We didn't even from the beginning even standardize 5G to cater for fixed wireless access, but it's the second most important application beyond enhanced mobile broadband. So what we're projecting in the report that fixed wireless access will reach 350 million households by 2030, which is quite significant. And what that means in comparable to what it looks like today, we're shipping, for example, 37 million fixed wireless terminals shipped in 2024. We've seen an interesting shift that service providers are to a large extent now offering speed-based tariff offerings rather than just you get whatever we can give you. So the speed-based tariffs are up to 43% this year, up from 30% a year ago, so a significant trend. When we look at the traffic, we see that FWA today represent 25% of all mobile data traffic. That portion is growing to 36% by 2030. Even though there is a significant growth, both of fixed wireless, the mobile traffic growth is still there. So even at these pretty remarkable growth numbers for fixed wireless is going to be less than 40% of all the total traffic by 2030. And we also have an article in the paper that's covering a little bit what Elisa is doing, one of the operators in Finland, how they're providing premium fixed wireless access services with priority. So we see that there's more exploration of advanced operators that today are looking at, hey, how can we create an even better fixed wireless access experience for customers?
And to amplify that last point a little bit, the report highlights how early mover service providers are already offering value delivery models based on differentiated connectivity. Can you tell us what types of services these are and give us some examples or case studies?
This is perhaps one of the most interesting areas, is essentially that we're now starting to see that the differentiation of services beyond the existing model that is in play both for fixed wireless and enhanced mobile broadband, which you can describe it as one size fits all, meaning every single application running on top of the network get exactly the same type of connectivity and same type of priority. So in the report we have two articles that I think tell complementary stories, but they're different in the sense. One is a little bit what T-Mobile is doing for service differentiation, where you can say that they're doing 4 different types of differentiation of their services. One which is based on location. So, for example, when they go out and deploy a network at a temporary event, like a concert, a major sports event, and something like that, it used to be purely a public cellular network for the people that were visiting. Today, you start carving out slices of that network for some of the private purposes, like connecting TV cameras, connecting payment terminals, security screening, ticket screening, all these kind of things that happen around an event, which is relevant to, which need connectivity. Now you can do both them and serving the fans of the same network. So that's based on a slicing that's based on, or differentiation based on the location. There's another one that they also do is application-based, where, for example, for video calling, where they offer video calling over a dedicated part of the network to enhance the user experience for that. And there you have like a specific application with specific needs, like video calling require good symmetrical bandwidth and consistent symmetrical bandwidth. The third thing they do is more industry-specific slices, where they have a specific slice for first responders, so that across the whole network in the country, they can now carve out a slice specific as industry and give that industry priority when needed. And the final bit is when you're looking at differentiation based on capabilities, so where you use security, for example, as a very secure slice of the network, which is relevant for a whole range of business applications. So that is, I think you can describe a couple of different ways you can differentiate the services based on needs that are different between these 4 different approaches. The other part, that article we cover there, is that you can also look at from the other end, looking for what is it that application developers need and how do they view differentiated connectivity. And then you can look at, classify the connectivity that required either by an application or rather by different tasks or job within an application. So this, here you go perhaps even more granular and look at it and say, what are all the different steps that a certain application do? And does it generate fixed or adaptive traffic? And what does it look like at the receiving end? Is it something that need to be consumed immediately, like video communication service, for example? Or is it something that can be buffered? So based on these 2 characteristics, fixed or adaptive input and immediate or buffered output, you can define 4 different traffic classes, which is relevant for application developers to help them create a better experience. So those are the 2 main articles in the paper that address what we can do to offer value beyond the undifferentiated connectivity.
The report also addresses AI, including generative AI applications. What does the report say related to AI?
So what we're saying, we're looking essentially at the big opportunity there when you're saying like all devices that are coming now, where you talk a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop, when anything, they have some built-in AI capabilities in the device, which allow the device to handle some of the workloads locally in the device. So you and I asking a question, we get the response, but it doesn't really leave the device. At the same time, if we look at the other end, beyond the very large data centers we see today, there is a trend towards moving even centralizing the data centers, especially for training of AI models, to very centralized locations, essentially where there's cheap, immense access to cheap electricity, so by a nuclear power plant or something like that. In between these two locations, you have a number of different options. You can have compute at the business premises. You can have the network edge, so in the middle of the network, or you can have that where the existing clouds are. And a lot of the exercise that we are covering in this article, essentially, what will be the impact of traffic from inference? So when you're essentially, you and I are asking questions that cannot be handled by the device locally and does not go to where the models were trained, but are handling in one of the locations in between. Because where the inference is going to take place and what the demand is on connectivity to that location is important for the user experience. We're also looking in the article very much on what would be the implication when we're going down the route of hyper-personalization of content. So you and I don't watch on the same commercial whenever something is playing out, but everything is tailored to our specific needs. A little bit like how the CDN movement happened when video first was introduced, that was pushed out further out towards the users, but from that point and out, it was the same thing that was shipped to the most people. Here we're looking at more about personalization. So we're having a qualitative discussion in this paper regarding what we think it will play out with and how what the role of AI will be as a major driver of traffic in the network.
Front of mind for the industry these days is 6G. So what does the report say about 6G and its growth expectations?
So when it comes to 6G, I think it's a lot of what the industry is focused on right now. It's trying to understand or set out the direction at the top regarding the creation of, and the main thing at the top is essentially the creation of a cyber-physical world. So where the cyber world and the physicals are more intimately connected, and that we will use them more seamlessly in between. Today, we are perhaps either cyber or physical, but going forward, it will be more closely tied together. It's an essential part of that paradigm is also that the fact that there will not be a company that's going to create this. It's very much about co-creation, very much across former industry borders. So this is like the big umbrella term up to 2030. The other thing that's talked about a lot is the evolution there. So historically, there's always been where we introduce a new 4G generation, for example, and then 5 years into the cycle, we move to the more advanced version of that. And then the next generation comes 5 years later than that. So you typically have a big step every 10 years and small significant steps 5 years in between. This looks a little bit different for 5G since we pushed and changed a little bit the way how we approached standalone architecture. So here we see more at first you do 5G NSA, which where everybody started. Then you do 5G SA, and that's where China and India started. For most other markets, they have the step of migrating to 5G SA and doing it across the whole network. That is then the foundation for 5G Advanced. So there is a number of different steps in between us getting to 6G. So I think that it's important to have the perspective on the second half of the 5G deployment cycle. This is perhaps where we're going to be even busier than we were in the first part when it comes to different kind of architectural changes and things we do. And the final thing that we're covering in the article is a little bit pointing out the 6 use case categories that's going to drive 6G. It's a global internet, so getting coverage everywhere. Extended reality, very much the AR piece, I think, is the most significant part. Autonomous mobility, both in the ground and in the air. And resilient connectivity, where we're seeing more and more of the industries that can use the network are very dependent on resiliency of the network. Spatial data, where we can track not only devices that are connected to the network, but also tracking unconnected devices. And then the final piece, the massive digital twins, which you could say is an extension of what we call massive machine type communication in 5G.
And so we've covered a lot of ground here. Are there any other key findings in the report that we missed?
Yeah, I think that in each of these Ericsson mobility reports, we try to mix a number of data that characterize the market, but we also try to make a number of different articles that actually are good examples of what's going on in different kinds of markets that other markets can learn from. So in this one, we have one article about STC in Saudi Arabia and about multi-carrier aggregation. It's typically when you're introducing 3 carriers and go even further beyond that. So I think the interesting point here is what happens when you start adding more and more and more carrier together, so it looks like one big swath of capacity across the network rather than everything sliced up in 20 megahertz slices. There's also one article on RedCap, and RedCap, I think, is essentially the one that's taking IoT beyond 4G. So if you're familiar with the two categories, the 2 IoT categories we had for 5G massive IoT and critical IoT, 5G RedCap will enable both of them. And I think here it's perhaps interesting to see a little bit, we can start drawing some comparisons with what happened with 4G. The big IoT knee, when a different variety of devices really took off for IoT, was in 2018. So that was 9 years into the deployment cycle. So what will be interesting to see how RedCap enables some of these segments and when we will see the need for 5G. And in the article, we have outlined 3 different phases over the next 3 years with slightly different devices in each of the phases. And the last 2 articles, they're covering digital airspace. So when we're taking mission critical applications, not only on the ground, but up in the air to serve anything that's moving around, from unmanned aerial vehicles to drones and things like that. And it's also an article covering how much the ICT energy, what we do, how we're doing on the energy side, since we're still growing at 2 to 3% per year. But we're doing a good job on the renewable side, that we over the last 3 have doubled the amount of renewable energy that's used in the network. So those were some of the other things which were covered in the report.
So when will you publish your next report? And if we can ask you to pull out your crystal ball, what can we look forward to in that report?
I think that, I know that the next report, because they come out at the same time every year, we publish them in June and November. So the next one will be out in June 2025. We do the big changes of the planning horizons in November. So the June report will be refined numbers, but it was still ending in 2030. So we take this opportunity to actually be very close to development. So actually, do any of the numbers need to be tweaked in the forecast here in between the big leaps in November every year. So we will continue with a mix of hot topics and customer co-created articles. And I think that we're trying to, I can't tell you exactly which things we're going to cover. AI is an important topic overall, and I think you will see that in refined understanding and the development of that going forward. I also think that you will see more and more examples of how good operators are advancing their offering beyond mobile broadband and fixed wireless access. Because as an industry, we know what those 2 applications are. But as we start differentiating connectivity in the network, as we start introducing new business model, the journey we have ahead of us is very similar to, if you think about the airline industry, the difference between having exactly one type of seats, selling one type of tickets, allowing people one type of food and one set of bags, to now a more differentiation, which is similar to when we introduced economy extra, business class and first class on planes. And when we, within each and every category, also started to play around with other parameters, like how many bags you can, security screening, check-in, and all those kind of things. So in my crystal ball, there's a lot of more differentiation taking place on the service side. And there's a lot more activity on the architecture in the network, where the innovation on the service side is intended to drive revenues, and the innovation on the architecture side is serving both the purpose of driving down the cost and complexity for the network, but also enabling some of these applications, because typically with increased revenues comes expectations that you get something better from the network that you have in the past. And that's where I think the main conversations will be.
That's excellent. And thanks, Peter, for speaking with us today about the findings from the Ericsson November 2024 mobility report. It was interesting to learn about the state of 5G and 6G technology and AI. And to our audience, you can find more podcasts at podcast.microwavejournal.com. And thanks for listening.